So to order. This meeting is being aired on public television and or streamed live and may be taped for later public broadcast or webcast. Your name is part of the public record and will be included in the minutes of this meeting. To avoid disruptions during our meeting, we'd appreciate if members of the audience would please turn off or mute your cell phones or other personal digital devices. Orangeville Town Council welcomes and encourages members of the public to comment on matters of interest to them. However, delegates are cautioned that derogatory or inappropriate remarks may constitute slander and could potentially lead to legal action against them. If such comments are made, the delegate will not be permitted to continue speaking, and the comments will not be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. To start off, I'd like a motion to approve the agenda. Councillor Post, second by Councillor Peters. All in favor? Thank you. Any disclosures of direct or indirect pecuniary interest? Seeing none, I'd like to move on to our national anthem. Please stand if you're able to. I'd like to have a motion to approve the minutes of the September 23rd, 2019 regular and closed meetings. Councillor Sherwood, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All in favor? Thank you. Okay, so tonight we're delighted to have some guests with us tonight. We've got Mayor of Caledon, Alan Thompson, the Mayor of Brockville, Mayor Jason Baker, and the Mayor of Pembroke, Mayor Mike LeMay. I just want to start off by reading a short biography of each of these gentlemen. So, Mayor Thompson was first elected to public office in 2003 as a Caledon area councillor. He was then elected as regional councillor in 2006, and in 2014 he was sworn in as the 7th mayor of the town of Caledon. He is currently serving his second term. Mayor Thompson is also the regional representative on the board of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario and is the chair of the Rural Ontario Municipal Association. Mayor Thompson is a lifelong resident of Caledon and a multi-generational farmer. Welcome, Mayor Thompson. Thank you. Mayor Jason Baker is the co-owner of Ketchum Manufacturing, which employs 51 people full-time and sells its products throughout the world. Mayor Baker was first elected to Brockville City Council as a West Ward councillor in 1997 at the age of 25. He has held that seat until this past municipal election when he was elected mayor. Welcome, Mayor Baker. Thank you. Mayor Mike LeMay of Pembroke was born in Penetanguishene on the shores of Georgian Bay. He completed his education at the University of Ottawa and moved to the Ottawa Valley in 1969 to teach at Fellows High School. He spent the rest of his teaching career with the Renfrew County Public School Board and became a high school vice principal. Mayor LeMay has served as the chair of the Police Services Board of Pembroke from 2011 to 2014. He was elected mayor of Pembroke in 2014 and re-elected in 2018. Welcome, Mayor LeMay. So tonight, what we're hoping is each of the mayors that are attending tonight, if you could spend maybe 5 minutes just giving a background of policing in your town or city, and you know, where your town is at right now with its policing. Mayor Thompson, could you start off?
Thank you, Mayor. And yes, Callan's a little unique, and we do now have the OPP, but there's a little bit of history here. Prior to regional government, I was a born and bred Shinkoozieite, which was part of Shinkoozie Township. And we had our own, one of the oldest police force in the province was the Shinkoozie Police Force, which later became the Region Appeal. In 1974, the Region Appeal was formed. Caledon's made up of 3 townships and two village councils, which made up part of the Region Appeal. We're 56% of the land mass, and we were under Peel Region Police. And 1982, at that point, Peel Region had a bit of a dilemma. They could not promote enough sergeants to grow the police force with all the growth that was happening in Mississauga and Brampton. So at that point in time, they decided to pull Peel Region Police from Caledon, and since we had OPP with a lot of the major highways, OPP did the rural policing in Caledon under the Section 10 of the Police Services Act. So we're all part of the Police Services Board in Peel, but that's how OPP started taking care of Caledon. We've had a good relationship. I got to say the OPP has worked extremely well with the Region Appeal and the neighboring forces. We have about 27 different complements, which is 3 civilian staff that help with our Caledon OPP. But also where the enhancements come, or the complements or the enhancements, no matter how, it depends on what wording and terminology you use, it mainly comes under the traffic. We have extra sergeant with officers to do traffic through Caledon. We have another group that look after break and enter, and it also gives us a force of 24/7. And also we have the community ones as well, which we've grown that enhancement, and which allows the OPP to run DARE, which is the part of teaching kids in grade 6 about drugs and alcohol, and also educating kids as well as grade 9 and 10 in high school, but the same thing, but also about human trafficking as well. It also gives us officers to both in the Catholic and the district school boards, and has worked extremely well and built those relationships. But it also gives us the community policing that we have, I guess, 5 trail bikes that ride the trailway, but also ride around the communities. It has worked really well in building relationships, especially with young people. And the other part that really, I got to say, we're blessed with is we have the auxiliaries, which is no cost to the community, but the last 2 years, they've done over 8,000 hours of community hours in the town of Caledon with all our events that we do. And this year it's going to be less. It's going to be slightly under 6, and the reason being is we're working with Dufferin County to grow their complement to get their auxiliaries up to speed. But we've had a great relationship, and I do know that we've had a great relationship working with the Orangeville Police. And you know, we even have the legend from Orangeville working with us by the name of Staff Sergeant Krug. And we all respect him when he was the traffic officer, but he's been a terrific teacher for training our OPP. So we've had a great relationship that way, but that's a little bit about how we got there and why we have the OPP in Caledon. And I think it's only fair that I would encourage council and public to ask the questions, and I try to answer it the best way I know how.
Thank you very much, Mayor Thompson. So Mayor Baker, your council and your city has had an interesting experience with reaching out for an OPP costing. I'm wondering if you can tell us some of the background with the city, why the costing was requested, and how the decision was rendered to not take OPP back in 2017.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The city of Brockville, I don't think is unique in the situation we were in. The percentage of our emergency services, the percentage of our operating budget being used by those three departments was growing disproportionately to the rest of the city departments. And so we have a police force in the city which is a bit unique. It's over 180 years old. We have an international waterway, so we do have a marine unit that looks after the water in front of our municipality. And we've always had a very close working relationship with the OPP for auxiliary services. And so our request to go after costing was nothing to do with the quality of the operation that we had in-house. It had everything to do with fiscal responsibility amongst the council. And it's a bit of a unique situation with the Police Services Board and with the council, in that you can talk about the size of the envelope you're willing to give them every year, but you have less control over saying how they can spend it. So a lot of that comes down to the quality of the Police Services Board that you have in place and the relationship you have with the administration. And we've been very lucky in the city of Brockville that we've almost always had a very positive relationship, and they've been willing to work with us. So it was a divisive year for sure in the last term of council. It was people's lives that were getting discussed in the public, and their future was unknown. And we learned how to attempt to be sensitive to that. But it was a painful process, but it came to a conclusion we were all cheering for.
And Mayor LeMay, Pembroke, you also have gone through an OPP costing in the past, I guess was six years ago. And at the time, you were on the Police Services Board. So can you also give some background as to that decision, how you came about asking for a costing, and where you're at now with your police service?
What happened, if we go back it was 2010, I was on the police board from about 2005, just as a member. But in 2010, what happened was there was an arbitration award to the civilian staff and also the special constables. That was almost $500,000. It was way out of line. So council of the day was very upset, basically at the cost. You can't control that. And they found, and the one thing I found over a period of time was the arbitrators always seemed to be on the side of the police force more so than the municipalities. So that's what started the conversation with the police board, and also the city council decided they wanted to look at all aspects and then ask for the costing. So from that point, we had a lot of communication with the police unions, with the staff, with also our community was highly involved. But finally, I think in 2012, the decision was made, and basically it was a case of we were quite pleased with our police force. Again, very similar to Brockville, they had been in existence from I think 1902. So, and delivered an excellent service within the community. But everything seemed to fall into line. Both the chief and the deputy chief were planning on retiring, within a year, which helped. In regards to, I think, from the notes I've sent to council, is that we knew we had to build a new police building, and that started in 2005 with the council of the day. In 2005 said, no way, we're not going to build one, but it became at the stage where we did need a new building. But it came right down to the various costs, and our Treasury Department did an excellent job of analysis on, okay, we wanted a long term, what would the cost be over the long term? With the various models. So when we looked at it and we made the decision, okay, I'm sorry, I wasn't on council at the time, so council made the decision that, from strictly the financial point of view, it made sense long-term to go with the OPP. My main concern at the time, as chair of the police board was you were changing from a Section 32 to a Section 10. Now, I don't know what the terminology is today. I've been out of it for a little while. And it was a case of, well, how much control would you have as a board? As far as the police board and city council, we got along extremely well all along. The police board itself did not, we sort of sat on the fence while council made its decision. And once they made the decision, then we did our best to make things work during the transition period. But since then, over time, I would say the saving has been tremendous for the city of Pembroke. When we did the costing factor, we feel we're saving almost $2 million a year, which is helping us pay the debenture on our police building, that we put up. So strictly from the financial point of view, it was excellent. As far as the service is concerned, we are very pleased. We have not had, that I'm aware of, I think we had one complaint in 2014 in regards to, are we getting the same service within the community? Well, basically we are. And I guess the big difference is it's now a contract. So we're paying the base like everybody else, and we're paying for a call per service. Our police board works very closely with the OPP, and the inspector that we have in the detachment is excellent. So the communication is really great. So at this stage, from the financial point of view, it's been tremendous and still is. There have been no surprises, as far as the OPP. The service has been very good. But I think I've always believed personally that the police board basically is a conduit working with the OPP and then coming to council. So they work very close with them, and of course we get reports constantly. But I think it's that cooperation that exists between our police board, the council, and of course now the OPP detachment. But basically it comes down to cost. And that's the main reason, and we are satisfied as of today, and we've just signed another contract through 2022.
So we're going to open this up now to councilors, and we talked previously maybe a couple of questions each. I see Deputy Mayor McIntosh is in the queue. Yes.
There is some issues with the technology in the hallway. Could we have someone check that out?
Mr. Bonato, do we have speakers out in the atrium there? They don't seem to be working very well. Apparently. Wondering if, no. Okay, I'm talking. Test, test, test. Can you hear us out there, Dan? You can now? Okay. Okay. Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, so I guess we'll go to council members now to ask questions. We'll maybe have a couple questions each. If there needs to be additional questions, and we'll carry on. So, Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. First of all, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all three of you for coming here tonight. My question is for both Mayor Thompson and Mayor LeMay, and you can fight about who's going to answer it. Recently, there was a lot of social media talk about a town, I believe it was New Tecumseh, that had to cancel a rib fest or one of their public events because OPP was unable to attend. Have you ever had anything like that happen in your area?
I'll go first. No, we've not had a problem ever that way that we've experienced. I do know, as Chair Aroma, is the biggest issue is getting insurance. The liability's been a huge issue, and I do not know what went on in New Tecumseh. I can't speak for that. I don't know what the problem is, but I do know a lot of community events across Ontario have been canceled because the joint sever liability and just not getting insurance to cover the events.
So, Mayor LeMay, any issues with pay duty officers attending or special events in your
Yes, what'll happen is with some of the special events, of course, the OPP charge. And I'm trying to think of the most recent one. Is that better? Oh, okay. So so as far as, so there is a charge to various organizations, and I can't remember exactly what it is, but we haven't had a major problem with it. Like, they've always been available. And the organizations that are running specific events and that require, say, police protection more so than, say, security. In a lot of our cases, it is security, but insurance and liability is becoming a major issue. So down the road, I'm not too sure how it'll turn out. But it has not been a major difficulty with us.
Do you want me to ask my second one?
Okay, let's have Deputy Mayor McIntosh ask his second question. Go ahead.
This one's for Mayor Thompson, and this may not be a fair question because you may not know the answer. How many officers actually are stationed in Bolton? Like, not stationed, but patrolling Bolton?
I can't tell you exactly how many at any given time. Because we're breaking in different divisions. As far as community enhancements, that's where the bulk of it is in Mayfield West and in Bolton. Again, then we have the traffic detail, and they hit the hot spots. That's how we've been able to reduce the fatalities. Before we developed the hotspot program about 11 years ago, our fatalities were running about 33 a year, and we're down. Unfortunately, we still have about 3 to 5, depending which year it is, unfortunately, and that's just because of Highway 10 and the traffic. But that's the main thing. But I can't off the top of my head, but I could get you that answer if you wanted.
Okay, thank you.
Again, thank you to all three mayors for being here tonight. My question is about enhancements, actually. There's been some speculation and some conversation that the OPP is short-staffed and has difficulty filling positions. And from an enhancement perspective, I know that's something that's near and dear to your heart, Mayor Thompson, and it is to ours as well. Our Orangeville Police Service are able to provide some exceptional services that are not covered right now under the base service of the OPP. So those enhancements would be something that would be very important. So from your experience and from the experience of Mayor LeMay as well, perhaps if you have enhancements, have you ever run into difficulties through any of your contracts where the OPP were unable to staff any of the enhancements that you were looking to have filled?
The enhancements, no, but over the main force itself has been a challenge with illness and different things across the province, with the freeze that was brought in by the province. It really hurt the OPP, and that's been resolved, and hopefully that never happens again. Our complement is up by full, but we were down at one point. We were down 10 officers, but it just meant that we were never under-serviced. But it was a challenge. What it did was it restricted the officers and when they can take time off. And when we were always short, or if we had an event, we always had support come in from Aurelia to make up the complement. So we always had officers. It wasn't that we're ever short, but on the payroll, yes, we were short, but never on the enhancement side. The enhancements were always covered. Yep.
In regards to Pembroke, enhancements have been fine. The one decision council made at the time when they went, you had the choice of having a standalone OPP, Department Integrated Service. So basically, the detachment in our area is the Upper Ottawa Valley Detachment. Now, Pembroke, because we're integrated, we've never had, because you're looking at the overall detachment and size, we've never had difficulty as far as the city is concerned, with as far as officers are concerned. And I think right now they're at full complement.
Thank you very much, and I too would like to thank the three mayors for being here in our wonderful community, and I also wanted to say that I've been to your wonderful communities too as well. This is kind of I guess, a two-part first question, and it's kind of a numbers question, and so I'd like to pass this question on to Mayor LeMay. You mentioned something in your acknowledgement at the beginning about a $2 million savings, but I looked at the information that you provided to us, And you said the City of Pembroke noted a reconciliation of funds based on the OPP contract for a total net sum of about $90,000 in 3 of the 5 years. So for the sake of clarification, I'm wondering if you might be able to provide that to the members of council.
In regards to that, it's when we're looking at the overall, if you had the statistics that we provided as well, we're looking at the overall projections that the Treasury Department gave us from the very beginning. This included, of course, paying off the debenture as we move along. So what's happened is, from our original, from looking at, okay, the amount of money that we would be receiving, are we going to be over what we calculated as far as the saving for the municipality? And every year under the contract, granted, it's varied from 45,000 to 90,000 that we feel is not is money that we've gained. But as far as the overall projection, basically what we're saying is if we had our present police force that we had at the time, it would be an additional almost $2 million that we'd be paying.
All right, thank you. And this one is to Mayor Thompson as well, and again, a numbers question. Taking a look at the information they provided our council, what do you attribute the 4.8% decrease from your 2018 budget moving into 2019?
That was because we were down on a number of officers. Our complement was, as I said, we were under service by 10. We were complemented by Aurelia on that, but because we weren't paying like the full first-class officer, that's where the savings had come back through. But what we've done with that savings is we just kept it in a reserve, because we do know with the growth, we're at 75,000 people now, and our population's going to double within 20 years. So we know that as we go forward, we just use that as a carry forward, so it's not a big budget hit when we have to grow the complement. And we're coming up for a new contract review in 2020.
Got it, thank you. I'll reserve my second question for later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you as well for attending. I think this should be very informative for everybody. My question is for Mayor Baker, if you don't mind. Could you elaborate a bit more on the marine aspect of the policing and what portion of your force would be dedicated to that, and how they interact with the OPP? I know we don't have, we're landlocked here essentially, but in terms of dealing with other units and having that relationship between the town force and the OPP, maybe you could just expand briefly on that.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Brockville is the city of the 1,000 islands. We actually own islands that are out in the St. Lawrence River, and so we have an obligation to police them, just like we do the normal part of our community. So we do have a marine unit. We have numerous officers who are trained to operate the vessel and respond, but we are not a marine recovery unit. So we would have a police presence out on the water during busy weekends. We have hydroplane race festivals and things like that when they would be out helping to control the waterway. But if there is an issue with, say, a diver or something like that out in the river, it is the OPP that comes in and does the body recovery.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, mayors, for attending today. First of all, I would like to pose a couple of questions to Brockville Mayor Baker. Have you, your police force, experienced any police-related lawsuits?
No, not necessarily police-related lawsuits that I can recall, but we do have disciplinarian actions amongst members of our local force, which causes a problem because of the length of time their discipline matters take to be heard, and so they're off on full pay while that matter is being handled, as I'm sure it would be under an OPP situation. But with we're a dedicated force amongst ourselves, we can't draw from other areas, so it drives overtime costs substantially. That was it was one of the contributing factors that moved us towards a costing, as was the arbitration situation across the province. And something a little, maybe not unique, but Brockville is the seat of our our county court. And of course, the court security costs fall on the host community. So the government has instituted a plan where that would get phased out and be shared by all members who contribute to the court caseload. But anytime we're putting those cost burdens onto a new taxpayer, it always seems to be phased out over a long period of time. So that's still happening in our budget.
Just a follow-up question with you, Mayor Baker. Your city chose to remain with your own police force. Did you find by doing that you have achieved the same results cost-wise compared to what the cost would have been to OPP?
We didn't get a $2 million savings, so we'll have to look into how that happened. I think we damaged our reputation with our local police service for a while, and it's coming back. And I think there was, the benefit to that is we have, I think, a very good understanding between the two parties on the need to communicate and the need for priority spending. And so the last contract that we signed with our frontline officers was negotiated locally. It wasn't arbitrated. I think a contributing factor to that was the request to do the costing. I think they listened and heard about the challenges we were facing from a budget standpoint, and we have an exceptional chief who deals with us very well, and so we break things down into what's needed now, what's wanted later, and the health and safety issues in between. And so it becomes a matter of priority spending as opposed to just tabling with us, here's the budget we require, and OCOPS is waiting if you don't agree. So it's a much healthier relationship than it was under certain chiefs in the past now, and I think you can put at least part of that down to the understanding that was learned from our side of the table to theirs, and we certainly learned a lot about policing through the process and how special a force we have.
Thank you, Your Worship. May I pose one more question to the other two mayors?
Go ahead,
Even though
Counselor.
that's a little,
Go ahead.
that's question 3. This is both for Mayor Thompson and Mayor LeMay. Do you know, okay, let me just backtrack here. Our municipal police takes up 23% of our budget, 23%, which is a substantial cost. Works out to probably over $800 a property on an average tax bill. Do you know if the OPP costs that you're are you charging them on a flat rate, like $519 per property, or are you doing it on a weighted assessment by tax rate? So therefore, the cost for individual taxpayers is fluctuating based on their property value. And do you know what the percentage is of your policing costs?
The percentage in Pembroke at the moment is 16% of our budget for policing.
16?
16%.
Do you know if it's flat rate charged per property?
Well, that I'm not too sure how to answer that. It's a case of when we look at what the treasurer did was provide the report, and you'll notice that I think per household it's $539 per property within the city. So that's every property. So just by averaging it. So it doesn't fluctuate, for instance, depending upon the assessment of your property.
So you are charging on a flat rate then?
That's correct, yeah.
And your percentage is 16%. And Mayor Thompson, would you be able to answer the same question?
Yes, percentage, I'm not really sure, but it's probably in the same ballpark, but it's not flat rate. It's assessed as flat rate on average, average costing of a home is, how much of a tax increase it's going to be. But, under the impact rate, it's assessed. It'll differentiate depending on what kind of property or what size everything is. That's how it's assessed at this point.
And you're not sure the percentage of your police budget?
No, I'm not.
Okay,
No.
thank you.
I'd be wrong if I said.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Taylor.
All right, thank you, Your Worship. Welcome, Your Worships. I guess my question is, I was very interested to hear about the moving from Section 32 to Section 10 in terms of the police actions and how that has gone. And specifically thinking about the Police Services Board, I guess my question's to all three of you, if you had an opinion or a thought, but our police board would work very closely in conjunction with the two individuals sitting in front of me here. I guess my question is between Section 32 and Section 10, in other words, OPP versus your regular police force, what level of autonomy have you lost, I guess would be the proper way to word it? You don't have as much autonomy with the OPP as you would previously, and I'm just curious what those differences would be.
That was one of my main concerns when I was chair of the police board, when we were looking at the costing as well, because Section 32, basically, you were responsible for everything, from negotiate, you name it. So you were, you know, the board was working extremely hard and almost on a constant basis because of legal issues and so on. And what I was concerned about, I was also on the board when we hired a new chief, so you're heavily involved as far as the police board in hiring and recommending to council who the chief would be. One of the major changes was, of course, with the OPP, you're still involved. So with the Section 10 board, it's a case of the OPP will bring in maybe 3 candidates from the OPP and say, all right, you know, as chair of the police board, or in my case, I was involved with the inspector that was hired at the time, and so we interviewed the 3 candidates, and but so you are limited. So it's a case of, for instance, you are really buying into, but my assumption was I wasn't overly concerned because they're all highly qualified, but you did have that input, but not as much as Section 32. But also the workload and the responsibility and the liability really decreases as well.
Your worship, okay to go?
Sure.
So, you know, you described our board, so I'm on the Police Services Board here in Orangeville, and I'm honored to do so. It's a busy board for certain, and the things that you would touch are very, very important. What has it evolved to now in terms of a responsibility level? Like, we would meet monthly, and there would be special meetings within the month as well, and those meetings are rich and busy. And I was just curious, what would be the new world under the OPP in terms of responsibilities?
Well, I'll say I don't know if anything different. I've always worked with OPP. We have monthly meetings. We're a ward set council, and all our councillors, when they have community meetings with community groups, the officers are all, if they're asked, are always present. A lot of times we do have a staff sergeant. If not, they make sure we have all the support that's needed. Especially with, we had some B&Es or break-and-enters, got to be a little bit rampant of late. And we set up neighborhood watches, and the OPP have been partnering all the way along to help the neighborhood watch groups. To me is, I don't have a seat at the Police Services Board, but I have a great relationship with the OPP, and anything that goes on, the chief is always keeping me abreast of what's going on, because as a mayor or as a councillor, if you having something happen, they want to make sure they give you the right information, because the media the first thing they're going to do is come to the mayor or council to say what's going on. So they want to make sure we've got abreast to say the right thing so we don't compromise the investigation, but also gives us something to work with. I've had an interesting year from a rollover of a fuel tanker, a year ago, and then, a house explosion and a flood. And they've been fantastic to make sure that I had all the resources I needed, the support I needed, and supported my local councillors as it's needed. So, yeah, we do. The Police Services Board under Section 10, we're an oxymoron. We're much different than everybody else sitting here. But as far as I'm concerned, accessible to council or whatever, there's always an officer to deal with the needs or whatever we've ever had an issue within the community. We've never had a problem or feeling we're isolated from us and them. They've been a great partner to the community.
Mayor LeMay, you want to weigh in on that?
Looking at, and I don't sit on the board any longer, but I think The relationship between the board and the OPP has been excellent in our case. They do meet monthly, but they're able to meet in regards to, for instance, there might be speeding on a particular road, or people might be upset at the homeless in a certain area. And the inspector is at all of the board meetings, so of course the board will express their concern. And he'll make sure, for instance, that the issues that are brought up at the police board are looked after. I also have the relationship with him, which I like as mayor, is that if there's anything that happens within the community that is very serious where the OPP are involved, he always notifies me. So I'm well aware of what's going on as mayor, because you never know again how the press is going to relate to a certain activity. So I really appreciate that. So as far as basically the collaborative relationship between the Section 10 board and the OPP, I find is working extremely well without all of the headaches you had as a Section 32. As I mentioned before, the negotiations, the court cases, the expense, the legal expenses, and so on.
Mayor Baker, I wonder if you could just weigh in, just your relationship with your police service board and your police chief and deputy chief.
When we were going through the costing review, I think the thing the community was most concerned with, I won't use the word local control, but local input in that police services board, and losing that. The OPP were very forthcoming through the entire process, saying, we will cost out whatever you want us to cost out. And then they spelled out how a police services board would work. And it did, in my opinion anyway, come back to a lot of what you're hearing here at the table is, we'll inform you of what's going on while it's happening. And what we enjoy as a local force is the ability to shift to the changing requirements. And we don't get an overtime bill for it. There's an opportunity for them to find something else in the budget and stop doing that in order to react to the immediate need. So for example, about a year ago, we had the first homicide in our community in many years. And it was actually the alleged perpetrators are a group of youth. And so the community was quite alarmed with that. And so there's been some reactions to that within our police services board, where we were asking for different types of patrolling in different areas at different times of the day than perhaps was the normal operations. So instead of bringing on numerous officers on overtime to do that, there was a shift in what they did for a period of time to meet the need that was immediate. And so instead of just getting an extra bill for the extra service, we were able to, through our police services board, talk to them about operational changes on a short period of time to meet that need. So we didn't go to the OPP. I don't know whether you would have that kind of control in the situation, but it didn't sound like that. We would have input into that. And the example used was if there's speeding in a certain street and you wanted to step up enforcement, they could do that. But with that came a bill for hours of service.
Very good. Thank you. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got a few quick ones, I hope, for Mayor Lemay, if you don't mind. And I'm sort of focusing on Pembroke in this case because geographically, you're much like Orangeville. You have a very tight boundary and surrounded by certainly rural and less dense developments. So I'm wondering, since you made the transition to OPP, and this may not be on the top of your head, but do you know if your calls for service have remained approximately the same and in line with expectations since that transition?
Yes, they remain roughly the same, so it's not been an issue. Like we've been able to, we've been fortunate where if we recommend, for instance, we're not charged, we may ask that, for instance, the main street, we want them to patrol the main street between certain hours, and we're not charged extra, so that again, they're able to change their pattern. And I guess it comes down to who's leading your police department as such. So we're quite pleased with the person that we have in charge of the OPP because we We have not seen any extra charges when we've requested, for instance, enhancements in certain areas.
Okay.
So we've been lucky that way.
Yeah, thanks. If I could continue. Sure. You touched on it briefly. You know, one of the strengths of the local force is having that community involvement. There's a number of services that are in flux, I suppose, and one of them would be beat patrol, for example. So has Pembroke been satisfied with the level of community engagement since the transition as well?
The community engagement, yes. You know, it's been going along quite, as far as personally I'm concerned. There's been a lot of community engagement, and they've been adapting quite well. Because my main concern before was what is the community policing going to be like under the OPP? But I've been more than satisfied, you know, with how things have gone along.
Thanks. And last one, to be quick. You have sort of a neighboring town in Petawawa. Is that also OPP?
That's correct. That's the other part of the detachment. So Petawawa, basically the Upper Ottawa Valley detachment includes Petawawa, ourselves, and the surrounding area, Laurentian Valley, the rural area.
Okay. And with those other postings in the detachment, have you found at any time that there's been a major shift in personnel in terms of leaving one area or having a lack of officers or major events that have created any dispersion of officers that's had a negative impact on the town?
No, I've not noticed any impact whatsoever, but one thing that changes is, for instance, I'm sure in Orangeville, everybody knows the officers. You know, you get that basically the officer is important, or not, the officer, you know him or her. The one big difference with the OPP is, you know, the officers are there, they're there on call. So at this stage of the game, I know very few of them. All I know are original officers are all hired, but they're throughout the detachment. So that's one of the major differences is that you don't have that personal contact you used to have as an individual.
I see. Thank you very much.
Wondering if Mayor Thompson could weigh in on the community engagement aspect. I think you touched on it earlier, but can you weigh in again on that?
Yeah, one thing we're extremely blessed is the auxiliaries are a big part. And that's what helps with a lot of the community events and support the officers on a lot of things. And that is one of the things they bring as a compliment to the community. You know, we all have you know, we're all a little bit different, but it all complements. It's true, generally when you become a sergeant or staff sergeant, you're pretty much positioned on where you want to be, and you get to know them. A lot of your first line officers generally move about, and but one thing I can say is as far as relationships in the community, as far as working with council, they've been terrific. Or if there's been I don't think there isn't a community that hasn't got speeding going on, and they've been extremely good at, especially where kids are getting off buses. They make sure they've made their shift changes so that they're there to keep an eye. It's still early fall, and people still, for some reason, I can't believe it, still forget to stop for a school bus. And they're there and with a vengeance, and we appreciate that. But as far as community events and different things, the relationship is good, and that's one thing I have to say is my council's had a great, anytime we've needed it, they've always been there for us. So I you know what to say, I don't know anything different. That's all I've ever worked with. So
Okay, and Mayor Baker, just to be, you know, balanced here, you're representing a local force, and you're happy with the community engagement that's going on in your town, or your city, I should say?
Yeah, when they're handing me out speeding tickets, I know their first name, so. No, it's, in fairness, we are surrounded by rural areas that are policed by the OPP, and we know a lot of them too, so. But it is right, we have a detachment that's about 5 minutes just north of our town, and between us and Smith Falls. And so they're housed there, so we have some of the higher ranking officers are based there. So I would agree with the mayor beside me, who says that the frontline patrol, they're getting a lot younger than I am, and I don't know them all, but when I started on council, I had gone to school with most of them. So so there is that small town flavor to it for sure.
Great, thank you. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. And to piggyback on that issue of community policing, I noticed in our audience tonight we have some of our fine auxiliary who are here. And they do play an important role in community policing. And Mayor Thompson, you had mentioned, you know, the number of hours that the OPP have contributed in your community, if I recall, something around 8,000, reducing down to 6 because their commitment will be with Dufferin. And I know Dufferin, if I recall, at the presentation that had been made here in council back in July, and also at the public forum, there was some reference to the auxiliary that they're still trying to get off the ground, somewhat in its infancy. But this is actually a question that is going to target two of the other mayors, Mayor Lemaire and Mayor Baker. Can you give me an example of how many auxiliary that you have within your forces? So in this case, Mayor Baker, what's your auxiliary made up of?
I couldn't speak to the number that we have on the auxiliary, but we do have an auxiliary there, and we have a very active, our frontline officers and our ranking officers are very involved in the community as well. So a lot of the policing that's done, there's a difference between at special events, the security that's being handled, and most of that is now hired out to private forces. And then there's a presence down there, but there's an off-duty presence as well as an on-duty. So we tend to have a lot of volunteers within the rank and file who are down at events as the front line, the first line, and then they're calling, because I don't think my chief would like me to speak operationally about how few officers we have on direct patrol, but that's how we handle things in our community. So the auxiliary is active, and it's a combination of people who enjoy that aspect of it, and as well, it's the foundation group. And our fire department benefits the same. There's a course at our local college, and so there's a number of students that are moved in there as part of their program, so they work hand in hand with our emergency services in those lines.
Okay, and Mayor Lemay, what is the complement that you have?
The complement involves a full detachment, and I think the complement might be around 30, but they're always around special events. So we see them, you know, quite often. So they are highly involved, and they're very visible in our community.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen.
Councillor Post.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As Mayor Baker said, this issue becomes a little uncomfortable because we are talking about people's livelihoods. So with that being said, Mayor Lemay, can you speak to what percentage of your initial force was kept on with the OPP? And a second part to that is the officers that were kept, how are they feeling about their transition over to the new force? Any concerns?
Of the 29 officers we had, 27 went to the OPP. One was fired shortly after, which we had been going through a legal process, and one for physical reasons decided to not apply and retire. And of course, as I mentioned, both the chief and deputy chief retired, and that was going to be part of their plan if we move forward with the OPP, so that worked out quite well. At the very beginning, I think the majority of them, now some of the people that transferred and were getting close to retirement probably retired within, say, 2 years. We have a lot of our officers are still around. The sergeant in charge of the detachment was one of our former officers. What the younger officers that I've spoken to have moved on. So it's a case of being able to be promoted, but also you could work right across the province. And for them, they really like that there is more of a chance to be promoted or to move on and to grow within the organization. So it really was not an issue except for I would say, the one officer that we had at the time.
Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. To, excuse me, Mayor Lemay, I was reviewing the OPP billing model for all of the municipalities that the OPP service. That is on our website if anyone cares to look at it. And over the last 4 years for Pembroke, I noticed that your rate is $616 per property, and you have 6,963 billable properties. that seems quite high compared to the provincial average of what some of the municipalities are paying. I noticed that your specific municipality, the cost is actually almost double of what other municipalities with your property count is. So I guess what I'm asking is, what makes that cost so much higher than the provincial average? Do you have a lot of enhancements?
No, we don't.
Mike, please. Thank you.
No, we don't, but I find that very difficult. I'd have to have the treasurer respond to that. I'm not able to.
That's fine, thank you. And just, Mayor Baker, when I asked the other two mayors if they knew the percentage of their budget for policing, do you off the top of your head know how much your municipal force is as part of your budget, what the percentage is?
Our two communities are very similar, and the percentage is very similar as well. We would be, I think, around 22.
Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mayor Thompson, I was hoping you could help me with the levels of service. And when I think back to Shelburne, when they went through their costing, some of the conversations that were had was, how much is the service upgrades, like over and above, essentially, and what is offered? And there was difficulty getting the answers to those questions, so some of those councillors up there felt they needed to vote for the Shelburne Police Force because the information wasn't available. For us here, would you have any recommendations of what we should be looking at, not necessarily costing, but over and above the basic service that Orangeville, and knowing the community, because I know you come here for dinner all the time and spend your hard-earned money here in our town, what you think that potentially would make sense for us?
Well, one is you have to find out, but what I have to say is, yes, I have 27 enhancements, but that's been built over time.
It's of a legendary status. Everybody
Yeah.
wants to talk about Caledon, right?
Yeah, no,
So
so
you have
it's.
27.
Yeah, so out of that, it's been built on the different police contracts over time. I think you have to find out what your community needs are. What is the base service, and what are you looking for? One thing you're very similar to Pembroke and Brockville is you're a small area, like you're what, 15 square miles. I'm 700. I'm 700 or kilometers, I mean, and I'm 731 square kilometers.
Right.
So, it's quite different. But what I think maybe what I'm asked is, what's my relationship and how I feel about it. And to me, as I said, I've only grown, or since I've been on council, I've only worked with the OPP. But I think growing the enhancements over time, one is because I know it was a big jump back in 2003, and one is because we took the courts on for Dufferin as well. So we needed to grow that enhancement, but I think we brought some officers at that point over from Orangeville under the OPP to do the court, to handle the courts. And a lot of it's officers near retirement, and they're stayed on, and they got tons of experience. You can't have a better officer to manage the courts than an experienced officer. But to do that, I think this is a really good question. Community is very important, so you've got to make sure you've got something. I have to say one of the best investments that we have grown since I've been on council is growing more officers for schools. We have 4 high schools, so we've tried to grow the officer complement. We have 4 officers that can cover that, but they cover the public schools as well. The best investment is the DARE program that we have, educating our youth and making them aware, but also builds the relationship with the officers as well. And to me, I really think that's your future, and that is something that's extremely important. And those officers also, I found that, drugs are everywhere. There's a lot of things everywhere, but it's the health and well-being. And on a per capita basis, Caledon's pretty good, but I really say a lot of it is starting to work with the youth in the public engagement programs locally. And I think that is, if you have officers on the ground, you want to make sure you've got that complement and what that's going to look like. So I think that's something you definitely need to ask to build into your costing. You need to do that because at the end of the day, the public needs to be serviced. So you want to compare apples to apples, not apples to oranges. But the other thing is too, you know, heaven forbid if you ever have a murder or whatever, they got the experts. You know, anytime you have something, they're there. We have the tactical force that is not on our tax base, but it's based in Caledon, and it's because we're the closest OPP detachment to the airport. So if there's ever a terrorist strike, our special tactical unit is there. And they're training all the time. But there's other complements that you get just because of the nature of the OPP and being fairly large. But on the other hand, having that local officer and that relationship and understanding your community is huge too. So I don't envy any of you. You have a tough one, but I think it's important to find out on the replacement for your size community, how many officers compared to what you have now, and what is that enhancement going to look like? One thing that we did grow to find the efficiencies too was we have 3 civilian units or people that serve to do the administration, and that's worked extremely well.
That's great. Great. Is it okay to keep going? Or are you going to pass?
Yeah,
it?
let's go one more, then I want to ask a couple, and then...
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. If I may, just as a follow-up to that, the 27 additions that you have, Mayor Thompson, would it be possible for you to share that with Mayor Brown, and maybe Mayor Brown could share that out with us? It is a legendary list, and
Absolutely.
people are very
We
interested
can
in
definitely
town and
give you
what that is.
Anything you need, we're glad to share that with you.
Okay, that would be just great. And can I
Carry
come
on.
back? Or
One more.
Yeah, one more. The level of communication, and just for the town to understand it and the residents that are watching tonight, it may be inappropriate, but this is what I do. When I have an issue, I contact the chief or the deputy chief, and they tell me how silly I am, or they tell me, hey, I'm going to do something about that, and I'll get in touch with those people. And it's usually done fairly quickly, and then there's a follow-up note. And I guess my point is I've become very accustomed to that level of communication, and I'm grateful for it. I know it's over and above, and I'm appreciative of it. What would be the 3 of yourselves' relationship now, or your understanding of what that relationship should be with the OPP commander in terms of that level of service? It's really important in my mind.
Yeah. So I think we have the same relationship. My council, we have the inspector and the staff sergeant are always there. We also have a communications officer to help to get anything out that we need. That's part of the OPP complement. But we've always, I can say that anytime or even as a counselor, anytime I've ever needed something, they've always been there. So, and again, follow up and very thorough and a report back on what the outcome was. So.
Great. Mayor LeMay?
The same occurs in our community as well. The communication I find the chair of the police board is the deputy mayor and works very closely with the inspector and the staff sergeant and of course the community officer. A council, I guess individual council members will tend to talk to the deputy mayor and say, look, I have a real issue here, do you mind talking to the inspector? So that personal type of thing that you were speaking about, it exists, but I don't think it, normally we just follow channels now more so than we would before.
Great. Okay, I don't see any other questions in the queue, so I wanted to ask one more question of the mayors and then, okay. Councillor Taylor wants to ask one more. But we do need to get on to our public question period, so maybe after my question and Councillor Taylor's, unless one more call here, folks, we good? Okay, then we'll get on to public questions. So Mayor LeMay and Mayor Baker, there were issues surrounding police buildings at the time of your consideration of going to OPP or rejecting the OPP. Mayor Baker, where did that weigh on your decision, costing of a new building? Where are you at now with the building with your community? Can you answer that, please?
The building we had was rejected by the OPP because of its proximity to a railway line. So it was disqualified under, they have a set of standards where they absolutely will not be. So it's not a freight line, it's just a passenger line between our community and Ottawa, but it was disqualified under that, they didn't really even go forward with doing a full audit of the building. It was disqualified. It did weigh in. We were assuming that the cost of the building would, eat up some of the savings between the OPP bid and our current costing, but the operational bid came in higher than our police bid right from the start, before you started talking about retirements and, layoffs of the civilian staff or the creation of the building. So our costing stopped at that point.
Right. And Mayor LeMay, if you could, I think you built a new building for the OPP, did you not?
Yes, we did. The building, and it goes right back to, I can remember being on the police board in 2005 originally, when they were looking at replacing the police building at that stage. Basically, the police building was the old county building that happened to be in the city. So really, really old and not really suitable. So the police force itself didn't really like the building, and it was old and was creating problems. And so it was a case of, we were looking at, before the costing occurred in 2010, looking at the possibility of replacing it because we had to. So it did not become an issue. Granted, when the OPP walked in, they said, no, we don't want, as far as costing, you're going to have to put up a new building. We're not prepared to move in here.
Right.
And we were aware of that. We were prepared for that. But during the transition period, they had to be in there. And that was fine. They accepted that until we were able to get the new building up. Right. But it had to be replaced. So really, it didn't play a role.
So your replacement was happening anyway?
That's
regardless
correct.
of,
Yeah.
okay. Good. Thanks for clarifying that. Okay, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Last thing for me is this council is starting to take its first hit in the community in terms of this process. And I'm just curious if the mayors that are here tonight, if you followed the process that we've implemented, would you have any advice for us on things that we should stop, start, or continue as we go through the process? Or are you content with what we're doing thus far to get to the end result of a decision?
I think where you're going about it, you're being open and transparent. To me, as you've brought mayors in from different areas, I think this is a really good start. And you know what? At the end of the day, you're all accountable for tax dollars, but also, it's protecting your community. So you carry a large weight, but you're taking it very seriously. And I think if there's anything that you have a question, you need to ask and you need to have the answer. So when you do make your final decision, you can sleep good saying, I did my homework. So I encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. I think you're doing a good job.
Mayor Baker, any thoughts?
I doubt any of you are going to sleep very well through the process. It's divisive. You can't win. I'm assuming your community is very much like ours, and half your community is looking for the number, and half of your community is cheering for your local force. And all you can do is put the information out there and collect it all. But it is very hard. We found it very hard to have an apples-to-apples comparison. And until we asked for a very specific made-in-Brockville costing. And so if the base contract, I'm sure, would have been significantly less money, but the things that were important to our community got put into the costing, and the cost came back, and it basically vindicated the local force for saying this is what it costs to deliver this level of policing service. And the city of Brockville would never pretend to say we are the base level. We have many enhancements with our existing force, and that was done by choice. So I was in favor of going through the costing. I thought it was extremely important to have the information for us to now turn around and move forward. one way or another, if you didn't get the costing, you'd find yourself back here the next term of council or the next time somebody asked the same question. It's a challenge in your budget, like it was a challenge in our budget. That won't go away after you make whatever decision you make. It's a matter of crafting forward how you want your community to be policed. And I don't think there's any wrong answer, because you've got two extremely professional options on the table. It just comes down to what's most important for Orangeville.
Thank you. Mayor Lemay?
I think the way you're proceeding is excellent, because it is going to be difficult. It's been mentioned by the other mayors, and the process is difficult. But again, each one of our communities tend to be different. Our circumstances, everything just fell into place, you know, and also has proven that the decision that council of the day made from the economic point of view was the way to go for the ratepayer within the community. So I think gathering all the information that you're doing now is really important. And then, of course, the involvement of the community in helping you in the process.
Thank you. Okay, so I've got one more question from Councillor Sherwood, and then we'll start our public question and answer period. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship. I'm going to put this out to all three mayors. Do you know what your ratio is of officers to your population?
No.
No. No across the board?
No. I can get you the information, but I don't have that.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we have a number of members of the public here. We're going to open this up for questions to the mayors that have graced us with their presence this evening. So if anybody would like to ask a question of one of our mayors, you can step up to the microphone. And if you could...
Mr. Mayor, through you, my name is Nick Gristo. I live in Orangeville, number 20 Paula Court, L9W5V1. So this question will be more for, I guess, Mayor LeMay. Not as much as Mayor Thompson, because he said he has no way of knowing the local police force. But my question is to you, sir. You mentioned a user pay system. Is my understanding the OPP, they gave a price, in other words, a contract. They gave a base price, and they also charge for every number of calls that they do come in the office. Can you explain to me, if you know the answer, what was the highest that was charged per call?
I'm not able to answer that because I don't.
So you don't know if it is $15 or $16, $20, $25? So you don't have the answer for that?
No, I don't. Sorry.
Yeah, because the reason I ask this question, I mean, the OPP will give a 3-year contract. My understanding, they're coming in, they do assess the situation and see what their cost is. But my biggest problem, and that's why I ask the question, is because what happens if you have 20, 25,000 calls, for example, in the municipality, and they're coming in, they charge maybe 50, 20, 16, it depends. Because I know it won't be $1 a call, I know that for a fact. That could be another major cost over and above the contract. And that seems that's the one that really bothers me personally. But since you don't have a question, for Mayor Thompson, maybe, do you have the answer? Do they charge you, your municipality, the base price plus the
Yes,
user pay call?
Yeah, and it's quite a bit less than what the region appeal is, but the region appeal does a lot of urbanized policing where ours is rural. So again, it's not a fair comparison, but we've never had overruns on the budget whatsoever. We've always come in with a surplus, not every year.
Thank you. Mr. Grisso, there's another document that's on our orangeville.ca website, and that's all of the costs for every municipality that's policed by OPP for the last 5 years, so 2015 through 2019. So there's a plethora of information there about historical costs for OPP, and I encourage you to have a look at that.
Mr. Mayor, I think that work in the past because I've been through this exercise, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ann Torrey, Morgandale Crescent in Orangeville, Larry 9 William, 3 Charlie 7. My question is kind of it's a three-way question, different sides obviously. And I'm actually kind of surprised with all the questions from the public in this ongoing process that nobody on council touched on this. But one thing that's really concerning to a lot of us is response times. Our local police force is very good at arriving at a scene or at a house call very, very quickly. I myself have had incidents with Dufferin OPP where they take 45 minutes or more to arrive at a call. So Mayor Thompson, as you said, this is the only way you've known. So I was wondering, each of you, what you think of response times. For Mayor Thompson, Mayor LeMay, the switchover would give you an idea of response times changed. And Mayor Baker, was response times ever the question when you guys were going through that process?
Yes, it was certainly a concern that we had. Our contract guaranteed there would be so many officers within the boundary at any one time, but they move officers around. And so if there was a call or a highway accident as the 401 runs through our community, they would be responding there and they would bring somebody else towards the boundary of our community. It's exactly the same way our county-wide ambulance system operates now. So we have challenges with our response times within our current complement because if they're delivering, a patient, a mental patient or something like that to the hospital, there's the need for more than one officer to attend that call, and the complement gets small and everything. So there is, if you have a car broken into or something like that, you're going to experience an extended response time. But if it's an emergent call, somebody's going to be there. If it's a 911 call, somebody's responding.
We've,
Mayor LeMay?
yeah, oh, sorry. One thing, what I found is that with the enhancements, whatever, our calls have been improved greatly over time. A lot of it's triaged, is what Mayor Baker said, but I have not heard from the public upset with response time on the OPP. And again, as Mayor Baker said, when there's a huge incident where you need a lot of resources, we get a lot of support from neighboring OPP detachments as well as Peel Region. Everybody comes in and compliments, as well as we've complimented Peel Region when they needed backup as well. So it's like fire emergencies, everybody's there to cover a community.
In our case as well, response time is not an issue. It's pretty well the same response time as we had when we had our regular police force, our own police force.
Great, thank you.
I'm Tina Hinsperger. I'm a resident in Orangeville. This question is for Mayor Thompson and Mayor LeMay. I've been following some of the other municipalities that have made the switch from municipal police force to OPP. One of the common comments that is made is a decrease in police presence in their communities once they had made that switch. I frequent Caledon all of the time. I'm there probably on a weekly basis. I know many residents in the Caledon area, and I know that there have been comments that I've heard about a lack of police presence. Particularly Bolton has a downtown core, and there doesn't seem to be a huge police presence in that area. I'm wondering if you can both comment with respect to any complaints you may have heard, or any concerns that you may have as well.
Well, in Maclean's magazine, we've ranked, I don't know how many years, for being the safest community in Canada. I know this, I've heard that, but I do know the police are out and about. They're where they need to be. To me is, especially in the summertime, there's lots of walkabout, but we have a lot of trails. We have a lot of connections through communities, and the police are always there. And we haven't had the assaults aren't a problem. So I think our officers are out doing their job. And, you know, the crime hasn't climbed. If it was, they're there. So to me, I think they're doing their job well. And if you haven't seen the police, it means there's a good person. So you're welcome anytime to come to Caledon.
In the big picture, the one thing that happened when we moved from our police to the OPP, because we are part of the integrated detachment, the courthouses are in Pembroke, there are OPP cars all over the place. So that then you get the comments and saying, geez, why are there so many police, you know, hanging around? But to get to the specifics, our downtown, the PBIA, would say, you know, we want more presence. We want them on bicycles, or we want them on, and we're doing that. But then again, they have the whole city to look after, and they're doing more and more of it. But it does become an issue, and on also certain times of the day. For instance, people say, I want them there at 10 o'clock at night. I know they're going to be there when the bars are closing, at which they are, you know, 12 and 1. But I'm walking up the main street, and I have some concerns, but I don't see. So we do have those issues, but there have not been that, you know, that many complaints. It is getting better, where they, you know, they are getting out of their cars more and walking.
Thank you.
Hello, Stephanie Montfort. I'm an Orangeville resident. My question is for Mr. LeMay, or Mayor LeMay. I know that you abut onto a military base for your area. So I know you have about, as of the 2016 stats, about 13,800 patrons that live roughly within your town. What percentage of those are military patrons? And then, because they're governed by military police, so you do have an onslaught of military police that would manage the military people that live within your neighborhood as well.
No, the military police aren't involved in the city at all. As far as Petawawa, as you mentioned, yes, they are on base, and yes, they look after the sections where they have the residents specifically. But the OPP look after the town of Petawawa just as they do in ours. As far as the number of military, we have roughly, I think, close to 500 military living within our city who work at Petawawa, who are part of the military establishment. But no, the military police have no role whatsoever in the city.
Military patrons are governed by the military police. They might get a call from the OPP, but then the military police would have to, because it's their military or military base individuals, they'd have to deal with them separately.
I'm not aware of that. If they are on the base, but if they create a problem within the city of Pembroke, the OPP would definitely be picking them up and looking after them. Now, maybe they transfer them. I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure how that operates.
For any kind of emergencies, do they ever come in for things like you had floods in that area? As of late, we had like a lot of the Ottawa River was flooding a whole bunch of areas. I think you had a bridge that had some concern. So do they actually assist in emergency situations, the military?
The military do come in, and they've been great, you know, as far as helping us. From the police aspect, the military police as such, no. But as far as the military coming into the city to help us with problems such as that, yes. You know, they do come in. Okay.
Hello, my name is Noel Ramsey. I live at 15 Fee Street here in Orangeville. It's kind of an overall question for the three communities. With the OPP, you have your base contract plus the enhancements, and Mayor Thompson, I think you indicated you're satisfied with the enhancements that you're getting from that. So that's what I want to just confirm, that you are happy, because according to the OPP, your overall per property cost is $519 per property. Mayor LeMay, in Pembroke, you're at like $616 per property, and you're happy with the enhancements that you're getting at that level, is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Happy with your police force, obviously. Do you know cost per property? Or you mentioned that you're about 22% of your budget is police.
I don't have the number at my fingertips, but those numbers sound about right. Well, I'm sure we're somewhere in the same neighborhood between the two.
23. Okay, I just want to make sure because you're 519 and 616. When the OPP gave you a cost, Mayor Baker, did they give you? You said it was about this. It was more costly to go to the OPP.
It was. The bid came in, and I believe we provided the bid to the town of Orangeville, and we were all quite surprised because we all made the assumption it would be less expensive, but in fact came in more expensive because we asked for the enhancements. So we wanted an apples to apples comparison. We insisted on that, so we had them place a bid for exactly the service that we were currently delivering.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Borgard. I live in Orangeville. I just wanted to first thank you for being here tonight. I just wanted to reiterate a few things because I so appreciate that you're using the terminology apples to apples, because I believe in some of our public conversations we were trying to get to that comparison, and we were having very ambiguous apples to oranges comparisons. So I understand from what you've shared tonight that costing was by no means how the OPP came to Caledon. It was born out of necessity related to a human resource issue and the fact that you had highways that needed patrolling. Is that correct? Is that correct?
Yes, we already had them in doing the highway, so it was just easier, yeah.
Demographic, not exactly like Orangeville. Pembroke, Mr. Mayor, could you tell me what your current population is?
I believe at the moment it's around 14,500.
Exactly comparable to Orangeville in terms of we have almost double the population. Still no apples. And Brockville, whose population is most comparable to Orangeville and did not go with the OPP, as I understand from your conversation, getting the level of service that already existed came with significant cost in addition to the original costing projection. Is that correct?
We never got a base contract. So when we were going through the process, we insisted on having them bid on what we already had or what we would consider going forward. And so that's where the costing came into play. So it was more expensive than our current operation at that time.
And I just wanted to also mention that you all mentioned in your presentations that you described a really cordial, trusted, and professional relationship between the mayor, your police boards, and the forces in your jurisdiction. And I'm sure that that helped to make what Mayor Baker described as what could be a deeply personal experience for those directly involved in costing much more palatable. So I appreciate that you all mentioned that to some degree. I would say that we have not, again, experienced a similar situation in Orangeville, so I don't know if we're having an apples to apples. One thing I wanted to just bring up as a question, you mentioned, Mr. Mayor, in Caledon. I worked as an educator in Caledon for a number of years, and you said specifically that if you were going to pay for anything above and beyond costing, it would be community officers in the schools. As an educator who worked in Caledon, I can tell you that that was one of the biggest struggles. And as an educator who supports in Orangeville currently, both as an educator and consultant, the one thing we were able to do with our community officers was work immediately to problem solve local problems that existed in schools. That was not present with the OPP. We were given the DARE program as a general solution to problems. So I appreciate that you've picked up on the fact that it's so necessary, but I did want to just highlight that in Orangeville we have that already.
Do you have a
So, thank
question,
you.
ma'am?
That was it. I just
Thank you.
wanted to ask.
Tina Hinsberger of Orangeville. This question is for Mayor LeMay. You had stated that one of the major differences that you have noticed since the switch to OPP is that the officers are not always the same. There are different officers going to different calls. Would you agree that when an officer is planted in a community, gets to know all of the residents, gets to know, the alleged offenders, the victims, the families involved when they're going out to domestic calls, that those relationships that they end up developing assist them to diffuse situations more quickly? They know more about the family going in than having a different officer attend these calls all of the time.
Yes, what you're saying is correct, and I guess we emphasize again the importance of the community officers working within the community. While we do have one that has been there for 4 or 5 years, which really helps in situations like this. But yes, you're correct. It would be nice if you had the same bodies there all the time, but no, you don't. But the thing that is, they're all professional, and we have not had any major, difficulties. But what you described is correct.
Okay.
Dennis Middlebrook from Orangeville. This is to the CAO through you, Worship. Pembroke's population has just been confirmed is 13,882 in 2016, with a population density of 1,900 people per square kilometer. Compared to Orangeville's 28,900 in 2016, the population density of 1,900 people per square kilometer, and the police budget is under $5 million. Our mayor did not want to have mayor from Leamington represented, as he politically stated. Their police budget is roughly in half of the OPS budget. So there is no comparison, with no disrespect intended to the mayor of Pembroke. Why are we comparing Orangeville to them?
Mr. Brennan.
Your Worship, to the delegate, what we're trying to achieve here tonight is for the public to have a chance to ask the 3 mayors questions on those who have transferred to the OPP, community that did not transfer to the OPP, and Mayor Thompson's agreed to come to a neighboring community that's been policed by the OPP for many years. I think it's 3 different scenarios. To compare apples to apples, or to find a municipality with the same geographical size, the same number of policing, the same geographical areas and everything, it's a challenge. It's a big challenge. So what we're hoping to hear from the 3 mayors, and I think they've done an excellent job thus far, is to provide more information to the public and to members of council, so that council is engaged and council understands of the important decision that they're making, and get all the information you can to get that to make that decision.
Thank you.
Tina Hinsberger again. This question is for Mayor Thompson. It's a 2-part question. Can you tell us how many community events do you hold each year?
Oh, boy. Community events. Well, I think at one point we had about 82 that were asking for funding, and there's some I probably have missed.
How many of those events are attended by OPP officers?
Pretty much all of them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I don't think anything that comes for funding is pretty much covered with an OPP officer of some kind.
My name is Doug Fry. My question is for Mayor Baker. You mentioned when you got your costing, you put your enhancements on the board right at the beginning. do you feel it's more advantageous to get the costing with your enhancements already up front as opposed to getting a costing and trying to figure out the enhancements after?
We struggled to try and find what the upside cost could be. And so it was broken down to us in that the OPP had a schedule. And so if they were attending for this certain call, it was this portion of an hour or hours that were assigned to that call, depending on the nature of the call. And then there was a base rate per hour. So it was a calculation based on a schedule that they were able to provide to us, but it was based on, you never knew how many calls you were going to get. You never knew about a major incident. And so we were trying to find a way to figure out what the upset cost could be in a year. And we struggled with that. And then when we said we wanted, we have a community policing officer and it's, one dedicated position who does nothing but safety enhancements and largely with schools. What would that cost? And so they talked about, well, this is how we do it in other communities. And so it just got down to the one promise that we did make as a council was going into this was that we would give the community an apples to apples comparison. And so it took us a while to get there and a lot of meetings to figure out how things would be costed, how they would be bid on, but that's what we ended up with.
Thank you. Okay, let's have one more question and then we'll wrap up the public session.
I'm not sure if I go through the chair or who to direct the question to. I appreciate the efforts that were made to make apples tonight. Was there a vetting process by which there was consideration to inviting a mayor who perhaps had gone OPP and regretted OPP and found that the costing was rather excessive?
Mr. Brennan.
Your Worship, no, I did not have that as a part of the criteria. The idea, again, I repeat, was to get the mayor here that had transferred to OPP, one that had not, and again, Mayor Thompson had agreed to come as a neighboring municipality that's been policed by the OPP to provide his pros or cons to being policed by the OPP.
Okay, one more question, and then we'll wrap up our public question and answer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and members of council, and the mayors that agreed to come here tonight. I'm just wondering, and maybe I missed it in the presentation at the, excuse me, at the beginning, Mr. Baker, Mayor Baker, in Pembroke, what year? I'm wondering what year they got the costing there. Was it?
2017, I believe, Mr. Baker.
So was that since the OPP came out with the new billing model?
Yes, the new billing model was out in 2014 for implementation in 2015, I believe. So
the reason I'm asking that is when I was on council here and we had the costing, I believe after that time, they sat down and done a new way of doing business with the towns. Am I wrong in thinking that? Because I thought we had it under the old billing model. And I can tell by your look.
Mr. Brennan, can I ask you to confirm? I think we're on the same billing model today as we were then.
Your Worship, we are on the same billing model. To clarify, when the OPP comes in, their first three-year plus contract, so their costing proposal would be based on FTEs, full-time equivalents. So it's officer per officer or position for position. When you transfer into the new billing model, it's based on three criteria. One is the base per property, which is right now $189 and some cents per every property. Then it's the calls to service. The calls to service are based on certain codes and certain calls to service. Our police force right now would track it the same way. And not all calls to service are chargeable. Some are not. So you get charged for that. And then it's the third part, which is your court security and prisoner transportation.
Okay, one more. Go ahead.
And the reason I'm asking that question is, I think Mr. Brennan addressed it there because tonight there's been many speakers come and ask questions, and it was, I recall, the OPP officers that came and made the presentation. Not all calls are, the municipality are charged for. There's different levels of calls, and it's in that process that that the town or the municipality ends up with their final cost for policing. I'd also like to touch on, if I could, just for 1 second, you're hearing and reading on Facebook, which is, of course, a good source of information that's correct, of the residents that have OPPs in the area. My mother grew up in Caledon. I lived in Agila, Simcoe County, always OPP. I have cousins, I have relatives, I have friends that live in every municipality around Orangeville. I don't hear the questions and the comments and the complaints about OPP policing, which apparently are rising up. So that's all I have to say on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kidd. Okay, with that, I want to thank Mayor Lemay, Mayor Thompson, and Mayor Baker for their time tonight. I think what we'll do is take a 5-minute recess and come back to the rest of our council meeting. Thank you very much. Again, we're on item number 8 of our agenda. This is a recommendation from town staff regarding a revised council calendar. May I have a motion to receive this? Councillor Andrews, seconded by Deputy Mayor McIntosh, and that this revised 2019 council schedule be approved. All in favor? Thank you. Okay, 8.2, Broadway traffic signal progression. We have a couple of questions here. Councillor Post.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Deputy Mayor McIntosh, I supported your motion back in April of 2019 to synchronize the traffic signals through the downtown core, because I do believe that there's a need to positively impact the traffic flow through that corridor of town. However, in reading the recommendation from staff and from Triton Engineering, in order to accomplish this task, there's a need to reduce the amount of time that pedestrians will have to cross Broadway. So the report outlines that using a walking speed of between 1 meter and 1.25 meters per second, that will ensure ample crossing time. However, as the chair of the Accessibility and Age-Friendly Committee, I can tell you that concerns have already been raised before this report came out that at some of the crossings, specifically First Street and Broadway, the time that's allotted currently is not sufficient from the perspective of those that have mobility issues. I reached out to Mr. Jones for some further information, and I've been informed that the existing time allotted at Broadway and First Street is 32 seconds, and the new proposed time is only 25. While this recommendation falls within the time that's recommended by the Ontario Traffic Manual, I'm not comfortable supporting a suggestion that actually moves our accessibility backwards. We're a forward-thinking council. We've already discussed ideas on how we can make our downtown core more attractive. And one of the key ways to accomplish that mission is to ensure that our downtown is pedestrian-friendly. So more so than traffic-friendly. I feel that by reducing the crossing times, we're in turn making it more difficult for our citizens with mobility issues, for our seniors and active agers, for our parents with young children to access and enjoy our downtown core. 7 seconds may not sound like a lot, but for the members of our community who experience difficulties in mobility, that's a 22% reduction in the time that they have to safely cross one of our busiest roads.
Thank you, Councillor Post. Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Post, for that. If I could call on Mr. Jones, I just want to confirm that we are meeting the standards that the Ontario government sets out for this. That would be my first question. Second question, is there any way around this and still keep traffic moving on Broadway as it should?
Mr. Jones.
Through you, Your Worship, to Deputy Mayor McIntosh. Firstly, yes, the Ontario Traffic Manual recommends walking speeds be considered between 1 and 1.25 meters per second, with a 1 meter per second walking speed being appropriate for seniors, small children, and people with accessibility issues. Using a walking speed of 1 meter per second, the required crossing time at Broadway and First Street for crossing Broadway is 18 seconds because it's about an 18-meter crossing. We're providing 25 seconds to cross. We do consider that to be ample based on the standards in the Ontario Traffic Manual. Your second question is whether there are other options. There are other options. However, with every option, there are drawbacks. If we were to keep the crossing times as they are now and simply try to synchronize the lights a little bit better, I suggest that we would be unable to accomplish the intent of your motion, which is to improve the efficiency of traffic flow on Broadway. There may be a minor improvement, but I suggest that in all likelihood it would be imperceptible. If we were to extend the cycle time so that right now the cycle time during the day is 85 seconds. And as it stands now, approximately 60% of that is green on Broadway and the other 40% is for the side streets. If we were to extend the cycle time to allow us to extend the amount of green time on Broadway and maintain the crossing time where it stands now, we could increase the amount of green time on Broadway, which is part of it. However, the drawback to that is that both pedestrians as well as traffic on the side streets are now waiting a much longer time before it changes to green. We get comments now with respect to how long it takes when you press the pedestrian button at Mill Street in particular before it changes, and changing those cycle times would simply make that worse. So, and as well, you'd end up with traffic that would be backing up for longer periods of time as well, both on the side streets and on Broadway. So ultimately, what we have recommended is both staff's recommendation as well as our consultants, and we do consider it to be a balanced approach that will allow for a reasonable amount of time for pedestrians to cross the road while achieving the intent of your motion by improving the efficiency of traffic flow on Broadway.
So just to confirm, we are exceeding the government recommendations?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so back, if I may, back to Councillor Post's, you mentioned that 18 seconds is a standard for crossing, and that we're at 25, correct?
Generally,
that's what you're recommending we go to.
That's correct. The amount of crossing time is based on the speed of a walker. Obviously, the further across an intersection might be, the longer time you will need to cross. At 1 meter per second, the crossing at First Street is 18 meters, so 18 seconds would be the required crossing time. We propose to provide 25 seconds.
Right. So Councillor Post, what are your further thoughts? Yeah, I'm sorry, I've got to get you. I don't know, gonna have to bounce some people here. Okay, we're gonna, there we go. Okay. Sorry, go right ahead. Councillor Post, sorry.
Thank you. No, and I definitely appreciate what Mr. Jones is saying, and I am aware that it does fall within what the Ontario Traffic Manual recommends. I just don't see this as being a black and white issue. I think there's a lot of gray in here, and I think that one of the things that makes Orangeville unique is the fact that we do our part to do extra for when it comes to the accessibility, when it comes to trying to make our downtown pedestrian friendly, and I feel that by reducing those crossing times, we are taking that away. One thing to note in the confirmation that I got from Mr. Jones is that of that crossing time that's being proposed, 10 seconds of the 25 seconds that are being proposed are where the light actually says walk. There are 9 seconds where it's the flashing don't walk symbol, and 6 seconds it's actually completely the stop hand where the traffic lights are changing. So that's considered to be part of that crossing time. So really at that point you're giving 19 seconds where it's safe to be crossing. And again, the perception of those, our senior population, our families with young children, is we want to make sure that it's pedestrian friendly there. And I do feel, and again, Deputy Mayor, I don't want to disrespect your motion at all because I support the intent of it. But with the way that it's phrased right now, I can't support reducing our crossing speeds or crossing times.
Mr. Jones.
Your Worship, what Councillor Post has said is indeed correct for the most part. What I want to say is that there is, I think, we've had concerns expressed in the past about crossing times, and there's a misconception that while the walk symbol is on is the only time that it's safe to be walking. What that's meant to mean is when the walk symbol is on, it's safe to commence walking. The idea that the flashing hand and the solid flashing hand is a time you shouldn't be walking, that's what we refer to as the clearance time. That if you've already begun walking, you can continue to walk and you should be able to clear the intersection before traffic is permitted to proceed across the intersection. You don't set up the walk symbol so that you have sufficient time for somebody who leaves necessarily to get all the way across. The idea of the flashing hand is to let somebody know that, okay, this is how much time you have left before this changes. You may not want to begin crossing. So she's absolutely correct that there is, the clearance time is made up of the flashing don't walk as well as the solid don't walk, but that is considered to be part of the clearance time, part of the crossing time that's permissible.
Right. Okay. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Jones, I think I know the answer to this because I read the report, but was any consideration given to making Broadway and First an all-way pedestrian red, like they have at some busy intersections in larger urban centers?
Mr. Jones.
No, it was not.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and thank you, Councillor Peters, for bringing that up. Not that I'm struggling with this particular report, because I read it too and really understand where we're coming from, but I also share some of the points from Councillor Post. And after having a number of phone calls and emails, and even a couple of drop-bys to my house, where I've had some residents who frequent the downtown core, especially on the weekend, I guess they were looking for a couple of things. Number one, is there any way that we can synchronize this, especially on the weekend, to represent the traffic versus that on a Monday to Friday basis? Because if I missed it in the report, I didn't see it. The other is, in fact, I think that our senior population, particularly those that may have some mobility issues, don't equate the idea of seconds. They look at the hand, they look at how much time they have, and if they feel that they can't get across, and I truly respect and really appreciate the detail that you've provided here tonight. But where I'm struggling is just the fact that you have some residents who are frequent downtown, who feel it's important that they support the businesses or just going about their business, could be going to the library, could be going to the doctors, could be going wherever. I think that the point that I want to make is that I'm struggling with this because I support the Deputy Mayor's motion, but it is really one that trying to figure out what's that sweet spot. And you've identified that sweet spot about 25 seconds, but for those that are walking about, maybe with some assistance, that doesn't sink into them. They want to get from here to there. If it happens to be from the library across the road, we know that most people are going to be courteous on the road. They're not going to end up, driving and waiting for the person to come across. But I just feel that that we got to find something that is agreeable for all of us to vote on positively.
Okay, Councillor Peters. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just also want to comment on Councillor Post's notes, and I agree that accessibility is an issue and pedestrian cross times are an issue. What I'm hoping, having looked at the study and having walked the downtown hundreds, if not thousands of times, is that we often see those intersections blocked because of the asynchronization of the intersections, in that people are making their left onto First, or they're halfway through the intersection at Broadway. And I think removing that impediment through better traffic flow will assist the pedestrians in a safer crossing. So despite having potentially shorter times, the frequency of their crossing in terms of the red going the other way should likely stay about the same, and I believe the traffic flow and safety issues will balance the other. So as of now, I'd be supporting it.
Right. The other comment I wanted to make is, having the traffic synchronized better is obviously a more productive way for people to get through town, but it's also, I think, more environmentally friendly as well. And when we're stopping and starting and idling through town, that's another part of this equation that we have to consider. So from what I can, and again, I don't want to, marginalize the mobility challenged people, but we have 30,000 people here to think about, and that the motion was to try and move traffic along. And I don't know, is there some sweet spot between 25 and 32 that would satisfy Councillor Post and yet still let us achieve this? Can we nibble a couple of seconds away, Mr. Jones? Can you comment on that?
Your Worship, the recommendation in the report is our effort to find a sweet spot. Okay. To the extent that we nibble away at this, I think is going to decrease the effectiveness of what we are trying to do. Right now, we do have issues where traffic does back up from one intersection to the next at times. and there's no amount of signal synchronization that's going to solve that problem. Just having a greater fraction of the time, it being green on Broadway, will assist with that. Ultimately, it's not a simple issue, as all of you have clearly characterized this evening. I believe that, you know, from a technical perspective, we've laid out a recommendation that meets the intent of the Ontario Traffic Manual and in fact exceeds it. However, certainly, you know, it's in some ways a question of what's going to be the best. You know, if council does give us authorization to move forward, as we've noted in the report, part of what we intend to do is monitor how it's working and tweak the way in which it's working to try and optimize the way it functions, to try and improve things. Because ultimately, the deputy mayor's motion was clearly intended to try and improve the efficiency of traffic flow on Broadway, and with some optimization, we're hoping that we can indeed do that. But ultimately, the recommendation of the report is what we have for you tonight.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? I guess we need to call a vote on this, and all in favor? Sorry, a motion? Okay, let's have a motion. Excuse me. Deputy Mayor McIntosh. Seconder? I'll second it. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, the motion passes. And Mr. Jones, I think all of us hope that it will be monitored, and if there's any tweaking necessary down the road, that we will accommodate. Thank you. Okay, moving on. We've got committee and board minutes. We have a number of board minutes that have been submitted, and if we have a motion to accept those minutes. Councillor Peters, second by Councillor Andrews. All in favor? Yes, Councillor Taylor. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Tongue in cheek, I want to prove that I read the library board meeting minutes, and I would like to understand why Councillor Peters leaves these meetings early. He left at 6 o'clock on June 26th. I read these meeting minutes.
Okay, he's not quite sure. All right. So we have a motion, I believe, Peters and Andrews, all in favor? Thank you. Question period. Any folks out there? Oh, Mr. Ramsey. Yes, sir.
Noel Ramsey at 15 Feed Street. And my question is with regards to the OPS budget. And, excuse me, so as the council, you, Mr. Mayor, and the rest of the councilors go forward and try to do this analysis to do a comparison, I think it's imperative that you actually have, the correct financial facts in front of you besides the other emotional issues that are coming up. The budget, I think, is sitting at $8,105,000 for the Police Services Board, or for the OPS, but that includes $1.946 million of revenue. $591,000 of that is user fees, and I believe, and I haven't got this exact number, that somewhere around 570-some thousand of that is actually criminal background checks. I attended the September 17th Police Services Board, and discussion came up that from the chief as well as others that there should be some consideration given to revise their forecast because they're missing the criminal background check revenue significantly. So my question to council through you, Mr. Mayor, is has the Police Services Board or has the OPS given you a revised revenue number so that you know the true forecasted outcome or budget for the OPS? Because the 8.1 million, in my understanding, isn't going to be a realistic number at this point.
No. The chief of police in that Police Service Board meeting that you referenced did state that the revenue forecast is off significantly, and I think if I'm not mistaken, I think he's going to be in the $300,000 range at the end of this year versus 540 or 570 that was projected. So not only is he going to be upside down this year, but going forward, we've learned that criminal record checks are going to be going online. So that entire revenue stream is likely in jeopardy going forward for the Orangeville Police Service.
Will council and the consultant have accurate financials in front of them for the bottom line, which is the 8.1, when doing the analysis of the comparison? Advised to reflect the background checks.
Let's go to Mr. Brennan for that.
Your Worship, that is something that we will discuss with the consultant. At this stage, they have been gathering information and reviewing it all. We have a planned phone conversation with him on Wednesday, and I'm sure some of these questions may come up as he's reviewing all of this.
Ms. McKinney.
Thank you to the chair. Recognizing that at the Police Services Board, there was a direction that the treasurer meet with some of the members of the police team to go through their budget. She has done that last week and is going to be in a position this week to give an update on both the revenue gap we were asked to look at as well as their capital budget.
Great, thank you. Did that answer your
So
question?
yes, yes. Short answer, yes.
Okay, so the follow-on is that will these financial numbers be made available to the public? Because in the public perception now, it looks like they're tracking to make the budget, and that may not be the case if these numbers get updated.
I think based on the conversation that we just had with Mr. Brennan, that the consultant will be made aware of this, and so I would expect that that will be shown in the consultant's report. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to acknowledge Mr. Ramsey. I have been concerned about this for a few Police Services Board meetings now. My math would say that we're going to be $300,000 to $400,000 overspent on the police budget. And then to acknowledge our director over here is that there has been work that's being done internally to get that information back to us. At this point, I don't know what it is, but I share your concerns. I'm worried that we're going to overspend on that line. I don't think it's going to impact the decisions that we're going to make. I mean, it's right for you to call that out. All of council should know that budget line is higher than what it's going to be. But my concern is for this year fiscally, and that is we're overspending a major line in our budget. That no, it hasn't happened yet, but that's what I believe is going to happen, and it's not a good thing.
Thank you, Mr. Ramsey. Any other questions? No.
No, thank you very much.
Okay, great. Seeing no one else in the audience, Mrs. Ramsey, any questions? No? Okay. All right. Okay, so moving on to item 11, we have a number of pieces of correspondence. 11 and on through 11.5. Do councillors wish to speak to it? Yes, Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, I want to speak to that, but I just got to quickly get to my notes.
Okay.
Okay, I believe I'm going to be directing this to Mr. Jones. On 11.5, I see that we've been notified about a proposed zoning bylaw amendment in Amaret's Township. And I just wanted to know if the planning staff have any concerns or views with respect to this, and are they going to be responding or attending that meeting?
Mr. Jones.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Sherwood. I haven't discussed this with planning staff. I can discuss it with them, and I can get back to you.
Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I wanted to speak to 11.2, and that is the town of Mono and the Justices of the Peace. Deputy Mayor John Creelman for Mono put forward a motion about supporting the fact that we need more awareness brought to this issue and a fix. So I would merely like this council to support Deputy Mayor Creelman for Mono on 11.2, and that is suggesting that this area is being underutilized in terms of Justice of the Peace. Thank you, underserved, thank you, underserved. But I just think it's a really important observation by him, and kudos to him for bringing it forward. So I'd like our council to do the same.
Maybe he should go back to being JP. Maybe fill in a spot or something. Okay, Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I just wanted to comment to Councillor Taylor's point, having spoken to the Deputy Mayor through some other committee work, he emphasized the fact that it is part of the process. The process is one of the reasons that there is a shortage, but there's also an issue of not getting enough people who would be interested in the position. I think if there's some messaging that is available where maybe council can end up supporting this particular request, I think would be very helpful. But he did echo the concerns quite clearly that there is a significant shortage and a significant backlog in some of the activities that would be processed through the JPs in the province.
So, Councillor Taylor, do you want to make a motion that we send a similarly worded letter to Honorable Doug Downey, Minister of the Attorney General? Yeah, okay.
I would
All right,
support that.
So you support that?
Yeah,
So do
absolutely.
you want to make that motion, and maybe we can do that? And then Councillor Andrews, so the motion would be to essentially take the letter of September 25th to Honorable Doug Downey, Ministry of Attorney General, and Orangeville it and send a similar letter. All in favor? Okay, thank you. So any other further comments? Oh, sorry, Councillor Taylor, you wish to speak again?
No, I do.
You're good? Okay. So under correspondence, so we have 11.1 through 11.5 with that additional motion there to support Deputy Mayor Creelman. Motion to receive this correspondence. Councillor Post, seconded by Deputy Mayor McIntosh. All in favor? Thank you. Okay. Notice of motion at meeting. I have one. Anybody else? So there was some chatter on our favorite news source, Facebook, a couple of weeks ago. It got a lot of traction. It was regarding school crosswalks, and as I was reminded, I jumped the gun a little bit, talked to some town staff, and had a meeting with Chief Kalinsky and our town staff member who looks after crossing guard supervision, Debbie Sheardown. So in further discussion with Mr. Jones, the correct procedure would have been to present something through a notice of motion for town staff to formally review this and come back with recommendations. So my motion reads, regarding crosswalks, Part A, I've got A and B here, school crosswalks, town council to request town staff to investigate safety concerns at school crosswalks through discussion with crossing guards and the Orangeville Police Service, and provide council with recommendations to include, but not limited to, audio signals such as whistles for crossing guards, visual safety signals such as orange pylons at crossings, temporary signs at midpoint of crossing and or improved road markings such as ladder-style crosswalks, and to review and suggest additional public education regarding crosswalks. And then Part B, I'm hoping Councillor Post might back me up on this. There was a discussion about a rainbow crosswalk in downtown Orangeville. And again, you know, the roads are serious things. We have to make sure that these kind of things meet with, you know, the Highway Traffic Act and any other traffic engineering. But the request here is for town council to request staff to investigate the cost of a rainbow-style crosswalk at Mill Street and Broadway, crossing at Mill, and potentially at Wellington and Broadway, crossing Broadway, reporting back to council prior to January 15th, 2020, so that installation could be considered for June 2020. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I really like where you're going with that. I guess my request would be is the crosswalks are super important for sure, but there's an extension to that for schools, specifically the elementary schools, so grade 8 and under. And you reference your news source, Mine is the same source. And what I'm getting is significant chatter about the unsafe conditions that exist in our school zones, specifically at drop-off and pickup. So the Orangeville Police has been very supportive when I have called and asked. I also linked in with the town this week and asked that our bylaw enforcement officers be out in certain schools and looking after things. But I would suggest that there's a bigger project here. I don't know how you link it into your crosswalks. I'm certainly supportive of what you're suggesting, but there's usually a crosswalk at a school as well. And it is really exploding in terms of interest from people, residents, parents, and what we would do. And I almost wonder if there's a bigger project there. And if I may just natter on for one more moment, I've also linked in with our Board of Education trustee, Gail Campbell. I have been to 3 different schools speaking with the principals about different things that they have. I have talked with Ray here at the town about things that we can do. It feels like there's a bunch of initiatives that aren't necessarily quite coming together and solving or making better at this point the issue. It's continuing to escalate. I'm not suggesting we're going to lose someone in terms of an accident, but the frustration of people is boiling over. And it's 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes at night, and we really need to look at it.
Yeah, well, I don't know what you folks feel, but there's certainly been a societal shift in terms of how kids get to school. And, you know, I walked to school. I walked a mile to school quite often through my life now. It's a long time ago, up a hill both ways, of course. But, you know, I don't know if you remember Councillor Peters, but during the bike and trail master plan meeting, is that what you were going to talk about? There was some talk about neighborhoods maybe getting together and having an adult take kids to school by bike. And so there's a number of soft things that we can encourage our residents to do. And yeah, it's a problem, but it's parents dropping their kids off. That's the problem. How do we stop that? How do we encourage them to let them walk with their friends to school instead of everybody getting ferried there at the same time? The road wasn't built for that. The school parking lot wasn't built for that. It's kind of loopy. So I don't know if you want to percolate on that and maybe at our next meeting bring something more concrete to us maybe and after your continuing investigation. But let's talk to Councillor Peters. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wholeheartedly second Councillor Taylor's comments about a larger initiative, and you actually picked up on a different thing from the Cycling Trails Master Plan. At the workshop, they discussed having almost buffer zones where cars were not allowed for half an hour a day for 100 meters or 200 meters. So there are solutions out there. I'm not saying that'll work in every case, but I think it is worth investigating a variety of solutions. We had Drive Safe Orangeville present here. We've had Mr. Lehman talk about speeds. The SNAP discusses Vision Zero. These are all, these can work together if we give them the time and effort to work on them in a holistic way. So I'd be happy to meet with Councillor Taylor over the coming weeks and discuss how this could become a more robust approach. And thank you for bringing up the topic.
Right. Okay, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I forgot when you mentioned the piece about the crosswalks and the whistles, it was actually something for me to follow up with town staff, but potentially just to discuss here. And that is, I understand that some crosswalks have whistles and other crosswalks don't. There just wasn't enough whistles for some reason. So I'll just give a shameless plug, but it's a community piece. And Dr. Carley got in touch with me today, who's got a chiropractic clinic here in town and a wonderful citizen, has offered to buy whistles and make sure that all of these people have them. So I'm not sure how we would institute that. I just kind of started communicating over the last 24 hours, but I think it would be a really good thing if we could implement something like that and get it going.
Again, back to my discussion with Mr. Jones last week, it was that through reaching out to other municipalities and discussing what are being done in other municipalities, the town staff would come back with recommendations, including that. And I think I think we need to let that happen, and then funding it. Again, Mr. Jones, if you could comment on audio sounds as specifically, is this something that is being done in town? Are you aware of this?
Through you, Your Worship, to the best of my knowledge, none of our crossing guards have whistles.
Right, okay. So I think, but when this came up, I started Googling like we do quite often when we look for solutions, and here I see a crossing guard with a whistle in his mouth, and I thought, well, of course, I mean, if you can notify the surrounding traffic that you're about to step off the curb with an audio sound, then that would bring them to attention, you would expect. But anyway, this is the notice of motion at meeting, so it's actually going to be voted on at our next meeting. So that's what it is for now. But thank you for the discussion on this. Okay, any other notices of motion at meeting? No, seeing none. We're moving on, unfinished business. Councillor Peters? No? Okay, new business. Is that what you wish to speak to? New business, okay. Councillor Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of people here to hear this, but hopefully they're watching online or will catch up later in the day or the week. But as you noted last meeting, I went to the Communities in Bloom conference in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia last week. And while there, I was very pleased to accept the Environmental Action Award on behalf of our community. This one was, I think, pretty special because it shows, you know, the Communities in Bloom communities are very forward-thinking. They have a lot of great involvement. They have beautiful towns. They have great initiatives. So to rise to the top of that group of towns and municipalities, I thought was pretty special. And I think it speaks to the number of initiatives and the quality of initiatives that we have here in town. So I just wanted to share that with everybody.
How many of these awards were given out?
Oh, there's only one for environmental action.
Really?
So they were down to 3 finalists. I don't recall the other towns. They're in our dust.
So this is a national award that we won.
It is.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
so it's a recognition award as a member of or a participant within the Communities in Bloom program. They have outstanding achievement awards for heritage and beauty in parks and some of these other things. So anyway, this I think is fantastic. And on a similar note, I'll be preparing a memo through Sustainable Orangeville to update everybody in the town and on council and staff of what happened at the conference and what I learned and what sort of I brought home for discussion and further implementation as we move forward.
Excellent. Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to bring council and the town of Orangeville 3 tidbits of information to be aware of. So October 9th is the town's very first transportation committee meeting. Looking forward to starting up and understanding, Deputy Mayor McIntosh will be on that as well, but understanding what the role of our transit system will be in the future. What have we got? Uber on there. Anything that's to do with transportation we will be tackling. The very first meeting, as I say, is October 9th. I wouldn't recommend the public come to that one. We'll just be kind of getting started and introducing ourselves. But the next one, which is the second Wednesday of each month, so the second Wednesday in November, which I can remind at that time, if the public would like to come and be a part of it, I certainly would encourage that. Number 2 is shameless plug for the committee that I'm on. But my good friends at Theatre Orangeville are starting a new play. It starts October 17th, and it's called Come Down From Up the River. I would hope that everyone will be attending, and I hope to see all of my council friends there. And then the last thing is November 16th up at the Best Western is Theatre Orangeville's Victorian Christmas. And I would hope to see many people in Orangeville at that one. It's a lot of fun. Oh, and Come Down From Up the River is a Norm Foster play who happens to be one of my absolute favorites. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of those key things. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we go into closed, I'm remiss here. Somebody sent in a policing discussion question via email. I just want to read it here. I've talked to the town clerk, Ms. Landry, and we'll send this out and hopefully have a response that we can put up. It reads, hello, as a very concerned Orangeville citizen, my biggest issue is regarding the dangerous drivers in our town. Pardon me. On a daily basis, the downtown residential streets are plagued with drivers who ignore speed limits and barely acknowledge stop signs. There are a number of us in our community who will be coming forward and running our own campaign to seek support for traffic calming measures and to raise awareness. How will either the Orangeville Police Services or the OPP help to tackle this growing problem, especially before more people are harmed? How have other communities tackled this? Have you used traffic calming such as speed humps or speed alerts? The residential streets of Orangeville are used to bypass Broadway between First and Clara and to avoid First Street. Morning and after work, school, Monday to Friday is very stressful and dangerous to be out walking or cycling. Change is needed. It doesn't seem the OPS would ever have the resources to make the needed impact. Looking to hear ideas from other towns and how you have addressed and if moving to OPP policing would help with resourcing issues. Thank you, Vanessa Lewis. So, that's the end of our open. We would like a motion to move into close. I'm sorry, is that right?
I think Councillor Peters had something just with respect to a recruitment update.
Okay, Councillor Peters.
Sorry, thank you for catching that, Madam Clerk. I was so excited about the word I forgot, but at the next council meeting, Sustainable Orangeville was unfortunate to lose one of its members through resignation, and so there will be a call to fill both that seat as well as the currently vacant seat for a Communities in Bloom member. So for everyone out there that will be perhaps partaking again in the application process, we'll go through the same system that we did earlier in the term to establish the committee members, and I encourage everybody who has an interest in environmental action in an award-winning town to apply.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Taylor.
If Councillor Peters gets to add one other on, it made me think of an event that happened. There was a group that came just recently to OSAT and spoke about, wrong? Can't do that? Sustainable Orangeville, excuse me. Came to Sustainable Orangeville recently and spoke about large grassy fields that were natural and were maintained as gardens, but had natural products. And I was just curious if you had an update for the group for that, because we did have some issues over on the northwest side, Hutchinson Court. And
Naturalized areas. Yeah.
I thought it would really make a difference if that presentation was interesting enough and it was brought to council. So I was just curious if your group had an update.
Sorry, Councillor Peters.
Certainly, and that update would be reflected in the minutes. If it was the September meeting, I wasn't in attendance and couldn't provide a specific update, but it was on the agenda again at our October meeting, which was just last week. One of the members who specializes in some of the ecological aspects was not in attendance, unfortunately. So it remains an agenda item, and the naturalization, I think, is, again, one of those approaches that fits in with the Communities in Bloom discussion. If and when we have someone representing that aspect back on the committee, I think it'll be a top priority. In the meantime, with the change of seasons and the winding down of the maintenance, I think we have a bit of time to come to a conclusion on that. So I don't have a lot of an update for you, but it remains on the agenda, and we're trying to get all the correct expertise in order to make commentary on that situation.
And before we get to close, one more thing. Credit Valley Conservation is seeking nominations for environmental awards. Applications have to be in by November 29th. Councillor Peters and I have had a discussion about this, and there's a category of corporate leadership. And we both think that the town of Orangeville and its staff would qualify for one of these environmental leadership awards. So I think we're going to work together and hopefully talk to town staff about this and submit a nomination for the town of Orangeville as a leader in environmental awards for Credit Valley Conservation. Okay, that's it. Okay, can we have a motion to move into closed? Councillor Taylor, second by Councillor Peters, all in favor? Okay, we're in closed. Sorry, folks. Here we go. The motion is that report CSIT 2019-001, website modernization RFP1 regarding advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, and a position plan, procedure, or criteria or instruction to be applied to any negotiation carried on by or on behalf of the municipality procurement matter be received, and that the council approve the allocation of additional funds in the amount of $65,000 to be funded from the 2018 surplus, required to facilitate a new modern website that will help provide a cohesive experience to existing town services and allow for future enhancements. I make that motion. Deputy Mayor McIntosh seconds it. All in favor? Okay. We need to have a motion regarding the bylaw to confirm the proceedings of this council of the corporation as regular and closed meetings held October the 7th. I'll make that motion, seconded by Councillor Post. All in favor? Okay, and motion to adjourn. Councillor Peters, Councillor Taylor, all in favor? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.